Okay, welcome back. Lesson 29, solving percent problems. Method 1, we're going to use translating to solve these percent problems. So there's a couple ways you can deal with percent problems, but I want to start off by looking at translation and using keywords. So, for example, of in math means multiplication, and is means equals, and what means the unknown, or x. So let x stand for the unknown value. Okay, let's practice this translation method. Literally like you do when you're learning German or Spanish and you're just reading left to right and translating. First example here. Solve 20% of 50 is what? Okay, 20%. Just going to write that down. Of means multiply, right? So I'm just going to write a dot for of 50 is means equals. So is means equals what, and what number and what value means x. Okay, so now that I've translated it and set up an equation, I can simply solve it. So by the way, 20%, I know you're comfortable now, so 20% as a decimal means 0.20. We need to know what 0.20 times 50 is. Now, I know up until this point, and that will equal x. I know up until this point, I've been having us do everything by hand, but typically as we head into this financial part, and by the way, you can think of this as money, 20% of 50 bucks is what? Think about tipping your waiter, right? Some of you have a gut instinct for that, but so this podcast will be not too long. I'm just going to rely on the calculator for this part. Typically, I let my students have a half calculator, half by hand test as we head into this. So 20%, 0.20 times 50. So I'm literally going to type that out. We get 10. So then I always like to think about, does it make sense? If you think about money. So if you say 20%, just kind of check. 20% of a $50, let's say, restaurant, you're at a restaurant, you have a $50 bill, and you want 20% of that, and you say that's $10 tip. Yeah, that would make sense. So if you think about all of these problems we're about to do in terms of money, it might help you just kind of relate whether your answer is reasonable. So it's all about, is your answer reasonable? And so we'll give that a yes. Okay, let's try the next one. 30% of what is 12? Well, let's try translating that. 30% of meaning multiply, what meaning x, is meaning equals 12. Now I'm going to clean that equation up. 30% written as a decimal is 0.30. So you have a 0.30x equals 12. Now if I'm going to solve for x, you know I'm going to divide by whatever's in front of it. It's coefficient, right? So divide by 0.30. And like I said, for the simplicity and time, we're literally going to type this out, 12 divided by 0.30. So 12 divided by 0.30. 40. So x equals 40. So again, just kind of think about whether that makes sense and just liken it to money. 30% of something is 12. Well, 30% of 40 bucks would be 12 bucks. So is reasonable, right? I always like to just go back and ask myself, is my answer reasonable? Especially if I'm thinking about it in a monetary sense. Okay, let's try the next one. Helpful hint, when solving a percent equation, write the percent as a decimal, like we did a moment ago. And if your unknown in the percent equation is a percent, don't forget to convert your answer to a percent at the end of the problem. All right, let's try it. Again with translating. 30 is, means equals, what percent of, means multiply, 128. So big note to self here, the unknown is the percent. So I'm just reminding myself that the unknown is the percent. Okay, now to solve for x, I'm going to divide both sides by 128. And I'm just going to key that in. So 30 divided by 128. You have about 0.234. So I'm going to record, and that's rounded, of course. So 0.234 is x, approximately x. Okay, but again, we were looking, our final answer, we were looking for a percent. So you have to remember to convert your decimal back to percent. So big note to self, slide 2 units right. Remember how to convert from decimal to percent. So then that means that we're looking at approximately 23.4%. Okay, hope that helps. Let's see what we have cooking on the next slide here. Method 2, you can also solve percent problems by using proportions. If you just kind of make this your basic step, so amount over base equals percent out of 100. Notice you always will have 100 on the denominator here. If you try that setup for these problems, it works just as well. So if we had to solve 20 is 40% of what number? Just a different option here if you like that. Amount over base. And I like this little helpful hint here. Whatever follows the word of is your base. So here, 20 is 40% of what number? It's kind of like fill in the blanks. 20, and then the base you don't know. 40%, you know the percent, and we will remember that we always have to have 100 here. Okay, so this is just kind of an alternative method for dealing with this type of problem. Another way I've seen it in some textbooks, I wanted to mention that, a lot of people say, oh, this is where we do is over of. Is over of equals percent out of 100. So if you follow that general sort of cute little strategy there, it'll work. So 20 is, there's my is, 40%, there's my 40, of what number? So the of is down here. When you arrive there, I'm going to do this in another color, red. When you arrive there, you've set up your proportion so you can cross multiply and solve. So 40 times x is 40x, and 20 times 100 is 2000, is 2000. And then of course, if you're solving for x, you're going to divide both sides by 40. And clearly 2000 divided by 40 is 50. And you see I had the answer pasted over here. So just bear in mind that to solve these kinds of problems, you can use is over of equals percent out of 100. Some people call it part to whole equals percent out of 100. It's still the same strategy. It's basically set up a proportion and cross multiply and solve. Okay? Let's try again. You just got to practice different, methods. What percent of 40 is 8? Well, I got to tell you, I like to just call it is over of equals percent out of 100. It's just a nice way to lay it out. Is, that's my 8, of, that's 40, percent, what percent? So percent unknown, and then always over 100. All right, so what percent of 40 is 8? If I lay out this sort of rubric here, I can cross multiply now. And now I'll have 40x equals 8 times 100 is 800. And obviously I'm going to divide both sides by 40 to solve for x. And x equals 20. And again, if you're thinking about money, what percent of $40 is $8? Well, whatever it is definitely less than 50%. In fact, it's 20%. So, by the way, I always go back and look at my original problem and say, oh, gee, they were asking me to solve for percent. So I have to remember, the kicker is here, I have to remember to say 20% is my final answer. So I always say ATQ, answer the question. Make sure you remember to put your percent symbol there because you were looking for what percent of 40 is 8. Okay, hope that helps. And by the way, you'll have the freedom to solve these percent problems either way you like. So if you're not a fan of this is over of equals percent out of 100, you can use the prior method that I talked about. And I think we are at the end of our notes. Let me check. Yep, that was the last slide. Okay, thank you and good luck out there.